people who would say like, but our company is, let's say, too small to be targeted by attacker X, Y, Z, or whatever. Or sure, what do we have that's worth stealing, from something? If you're thinking that your company is too small and doesn't have anything worth stealing, your company shouldn't be in business too much longer, right? Because you clearly worthless. So everybody has something of value, right, that needs to be defended. And also criminals don't really target in most cases. They're a lot more opportunistic.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Robert McArdle, Director of FTR and Cybercrime Research at Trend Micro. Bob, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks very much for having me, Ben.
So, describe a few events in your life that have significantly shaped your leadership style.
So that's a tricky one. I guess, well, the first one, I guess, would have to be just being given the space to be a leader in the first place, right? Or more precisely, being made a manager at some point in my career. I think leader comes normally afterwards, right? After you've kind of learned the ropes a bit. I actually remember well, it was a day of orienteering in the Bavarian Alps that ended up finding a yummy cooked pig, as the case may go. But so during all that orienteering, what I didn't realize was my then manager, Martin Roser, was obviously like looking through candidates and who was maybe showing some level of like leadership and so on. So I saw something in me back in the day, and that led to me having a manager position. The pig was also really good. So that was an extra bonus from the day. In terms of other events, I mean, I think there's been like multiple different like trainings, both internal ones and external ones over the years, some of which maybe resonated more than others at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you do kind of like, management or leadership training, you probably get a good maybe 10, 15% out of each one. If you go back a year later, you probably get another 5, 10% that you just weren't mature enough at the time to grasp, right? But for me, I think in particular, the ones that stand out are things like the more like psychology side of things like MBTIs for anybody who's done them, who's listening in, or things like disc profiles, essentially anything that lets you realize that other people think differently than you and that there's different ways you interact with people based on their profiles. And that's probably a key realization that helps in your day-to-day life as well. And well, you said 3 events. A third one, probably later in career, was moving from having a single team and managing to having like a cross team type setup where you're responsible for like cross team, major projects where you don't have positional authority over everybody involved. So you have to do it through collaboration and bargaining and knowing a bit of the politics of what's going on and all that. And that opens up like maybe another level of what you do as a leader.
Nice. So I have to admit, in the spirit of full disclosure, Martin also pulled me into the ranks of management. Different event, but I think a pretty similar style. So I knew most of that story. But so what non-technical skills do you rely on that have the most impact on your career?
I think it's I don't know if it's a skill or it's just a kind of like a passion on my side, but I have a fascination with lifetime learning or lifelong learning, if you like, just like every day learn something, right? Like earlier in my career, it would definitely have been more like technical skills and whatever, hacky skill at the time or investigation skill. But I think without that like passion for lifelong learning, it honestly would have been harder to transition from a technical role to a more like management or leadership role. And I think that's down to that when you embrace that kind of joy, like constantly learning, all the new approaches that come with the management side aren't like a burden where you have to go learn this stuff. It's like, I wonder how this works. I wonder how that works. I'll try that out. And then it still helps you like learn and enjoy the management stuff while keeping maybe a strategic kind of technical skill set, right? Maybe not so much hands on keyboard at a certain point, but yeah, so that just joy of lifelong learning is probably the key.
So you've got a couple teams now, couple relatively big, high-powered teams. How do you find the time to do that learning and keep up on that?
I don't think anybody knows how to find the time, right? Sleep less, right? No, don't do that. For anybody who's listening in, definitely sleep. No, I think one thing I try to carve out for myself is I found that it doesn't always happen, but I do my very best to spend at least 1 hour every single day learning, including weekends. And that just compound knowledge over time. It really, really, really builds up. So, it's only an hour a day that you can carve out. But if you just block that in your calendar for yourself and it's a meeting like any other meeting. So if people say, hey, can I have a call with you at 2:00? You're like, nope, got something. And just spend that hour and do it. And it's both a mental form of relaxation really, because you're getting a bit of time to yourself, but it just builds over time, and it gives you that kind of ability to tackle even bigger learnings or courses and things like that if you want to do them.
All right. Tell me about an individual who altered the trajectory of your career.
Well, there was an old man in the shop who was selling a mogwai at one stage, but that's probably not it. Don't feed those things after midnight. No. So for me, it would have to be, and you mentioned already, a mutual boss of ours. So Martin Rosler, worked under him as a team manager while he was the overall senior director for a team for a decade plus. I learned a lot about kind of management and leadership from him. Pretty much everything, I think, certainly in my early to mid kind of management career, I would definitely have learned through Martin. And maybe only in the later stages, as I kind of embraced my own style and different approaches, I'd have ways where I do things like sometimes I'd use his approach, sometimes I'd use my own approach. You know, I got a bit more maturity and was doing things my own way. So overall, excellent coach that, yeah, still to this day, go back to a lot of the stuff that I learned.
One of his phrases that I fall back on surprisingly often still is, you know, you as a manager, you're leading people to their success. As one of those that took, you know, as you were talking about, you know, go back the next time and you get another 5%. It's like every time I encounter that, it's like, you know, you pick up more nuance, and it doesn't seem like a complicated statement, but there are several notions that kind of stack up over time as, you know, what does it mean for one of the members of your team to be successful?
Yeah, there's whole layers to that, right? As you said, like there's the whole, like obviously coaching and developing of staff. There's the overall then, like, you know, what makes your team successful is it's not you on stage being the shining star saying, look, we got the great results this quarter or whatever. Ideally, at least for me personally, ideally I'm down the back of the room, like not taking the credit for it, and somebody else is taking the credit for it and getting a chance to therefore step forward in their career as well. But it also just helps you orientate a bit as well. Like in terms of like what should the team be doing next? It's you look at the components that you have within the team, the skill sets, you're like, right, with these raw materials, what's the best we can do? Like how can I lead these forward and then get to something that is relevant for the company as well, right?
Yeah, and I'll even add paradoxically that moment you realize that maybe moving on is the best thing for an individual wasn't intuitive initially, but
yeah, that can sometimes happen, right? I guess like if you have somebody who's, you know, coming up behind you as an obvious like leader in their own right, and basically your position is where they should be, that would be something that you have to kind of maybe factor in at a certain point.
Yep. Or even a different organization. Maybe their skill sets have expanded beyond what your team needs. It's complicated. Yeah. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned from a security incident or operational failure?
So I'm utterly, like, you know me well enough to know I suck at remembering details of anything. That's why I have like a million different like mind maps and things to keep my brain external to the brain that doesn't work properly. And so for me, my mind pretty much thinks in concepts. So I think it's like rather than recall one individual incident and go, okay, this is what I learned. It's taking little bits from each one, normally in kind of conceptual form, and essentially assembling them in my head in overall knowledge. So for me, I tend to be a person who sees the forest more than the trees. So each day there's something that gets added into that. And I do occasionally from time to time try to condense that down into some like cheat sheets almost for myself, like of knowledge, which is useful to do from time to time because it really helps you distill down like what is it I'm doing that's working, what is it I'm doing that's not working, so that you can kind of reflect on them. Yep.
So how do you balance technical expertise with the people skills you need to be a good leader?
I think it comes down. So I've been lucky for a large part of my career. I've been in research roles of some description within our industry. So I think the key is treat all of it with the joy that you'd apply to research, right? So treat the people skills side, the psychological side, the management and how to do it properly and set up teams and all that as just another research task, right? So it's just one where you're like, how do people do it? People have done it before. You're not the first person to ever have to get some humans to go in the right direction at the same time, right? So how have other people done it? And at the same time, don't fully sacrifice the tech skills. I think you need to understand them certainly at strategic and kind of core level of them. But maybe you will lose some of the hands-on keyboard speed, right? But the thing is, you will have whole teams of people that you can direct to do the hands-on keyboard. And you can actually get a lot more done. So whereas before you might be like, okay, I could code this up myself or I could do whatever. I can very quickly come up with the concept I need done and then assign it to the right people and check back in on them in X period of time. And you can actually amplify your technical skills. So your technical skills grow just because you have more resources to actually pull them off than your actual own physical time and so on. So yeah, I would like take that research approach to the management side and be aware that you're not letting go of your technical skills. You're just simply outsourcing them to other people and then looking at the results and then passing the result back in again to the team.
Yeah. So how does that translate into, maintaining credibility as in that you have the technical skills to really talk about this at the right level and, you understand what it is the team is doing, but you've got other things, making sure their bonuses are on time or whatever business function you've got to handle at the same moment.
I think it's important to have both, I said like that strategic level view of what the team are doing, right? So if like they're building something conceptually, architectural level, how does this all work, right? I've got it, right? Or like this particular attack that the team are investigating, generally speaking, how does it work? And you mightn't be able to down at the level of like, if I reverse engineer the file, what am I going to see type thing, right? Or, look through the logs. But it's important that the team see that you understand that at that level, so you can still talk and interact with them. But then be honest, just be like, I don't have time to go down to this level anymore. So you're way better than I am. You don't have to pretend that you know that. And you don't have to also like let go of your ego. Don't do the whole like, oh, back when in my day, I used to do this all the time. It's like, you're not in your day anymore. You've moved on. Get over yourself, right? So like let that ego go and let the team be aware of where you can still add value, which is the bigger picture side, but that you value their technical input side as well. And what they will realize over some time is because our industry in particular is quite cyclical, at least in attacks and things like, the technique changes, but it's the same attack, give or take, right? People will start realizing when you say like, oh, we've seen this before. This was the same thing as like 10 years ago when they did this, but they're just now using this tool instead. So they will see that value coming through that they mightn't have.
So building on that, how do you maintain like the awareness of the emerging threats, keeping up on, what the new techniques are, what the new, one of the things we look at a lot, we used to look at it when I was on the team is what's coming next? What can we extrapolate out of this? And to do that, you've got to be rather up to date on what's actually happening. How do you balance that with actually maintaining the team?
So I'm kind of looking in that sense because I've got two teams. The one you refer to, which is always looking to the future, right? So for listeners, they're basically scouting the next 1 to 3 years and we see threats and infrastructure and user behavior developing, right? And then I have another team, which is more operational intelligence. What are criminals doing right now? So they're more in the today of all of that. Mm-hmm. So when you put those two together, the nice thing is that's 50% of my time is kind of dedicated all the time to keeping up on what's going to happen next. Like I have to do that. Otherwise I literally can't lead that first team. So that's probably helpful that maybe people in a more pure operational role, like running a SOC environment or something like that may not have as much of. And then it's a case of honestly subscribing. In my case, obviously I get from the team and the team's internal chats and stuff. We get like, hey, have you seen this article? Have you seen that article? But also for myself, I subscribe to a bunch of different RSS feeds or used to use, X, Twitter before it turned into a complete cesspool of humanity. So those type of things to just subscribe to what I prefer to go for ones that are low in terms of volume, but very high in terms of quality, right? And then redo those. And that's where the 1 hour a day of learning comes in. Just sometimes that learning is just reading RSS feeds, catching up on some, papers and things like that.
Okay. Is there a piece of generic leadership advice that you'd like to debunk in the context of cybersecurity?
I'm trying to think of one. So like there's a whole bunch of myths and some of them are just so like clearly wrong that like it's hard to actually come across your head. The one that keep coming up, but this is probably more on the defender side, people who would say like, but our company is, I say, too small to be targeted by attacker X, Y, Z. Or sure, what do we have that's worth stealing, from something? If you're thinking that your company is too small and doesn't have anything worth stealing, your company shouldn't be in business too much longer, right? Because you clearly worthless. So everybody has something of value, right, that needs to be defended. And also criminals don't really target in most cases. They're a lot more opportunistic. So something you have is exposed and can be taken over. So when you're thinking in terms of like as a security leadership person, being aware on that side. Other things that would come to mind? That's the first myth that comes to my head. I don't dwell too much on them. I don't know if you've heard of any other good ones that drive you insane, but that would be one for me.
No, I think I'll build on that and say that, like, yeah, it's entirely reasonable that the small mom and pop shop down the street isn't a target of nation state actors, but they're absolutely a target of, penny ante scammers and thugs. Your business can be in a nice neighborhood, but you've got to be connected to the internet, and that's a pretty large neighborhood.
Yep, most definitely.
All right. So how do you define an effective team culture, and how do you build it?
That's always a tricky one, right? I think a healthy culture within a team is one where the team themselves are, number one, I think they have to enjoy what they're doing, right? Obviously, there's an overlap, but it has to be relevant to the company and so on. But they have to enjoy what they're doing. They don't have to be the best of friends, but they have to have a very, a good personal relationship and so on within the team, and driving towards a clear common goal, whatever that lighthouse statement is you've given them. And ideally, that lighthouse statement or that vision that you've given for the team is something that will last 5, 10 longer years. Of course, you'll have your submissions and your tactical, this is how we're doing it this year, but there should be something that inspires all the team that they would all agree, like, that is why I am at this company, this team, right? And bring them together. And then a layer below that, there's lots of other things that you can kind of do and curate over time, like being very open and trustworthy within a team so that anybody is able to speak up and say, I agree with this, I disagree with this, and having like kind of positive cultures within teams. And giving them, I think, as well as having that lighthouse, give them something unique that they can excel at so that they can feel proud at the end of the day that, like, hey, we are the best at doing X, whatever X is, right, at any given time. So it's lots of the small things then, being honest. And that's actually, people might think that small things aren't important. It's every one of them important. How do you run a meeting? How do you run Teams or Zoom or whatever you use, chats? All those small things, if you get them slightly wrong, it starts building and niggling and niggling and niggling. And that can actually start cutting apart the team.
Right. What are your rules for running meetings?
So our team is essentially fully remote. Some people are in the Trend Micro offices, but a lot of them are working from home, or effectively there's not many offices where two of us are there. So a couple of things that we would run in meetings, we would always share agendas up front, because we want the meetings to not be like just a checklist of, did you do X? Yes. Did you do Y? That's the waste of everybody's time. So like sharing that stuff in advance, people can put in updates, everybody's read them in advance. And that way the meetings are more about problem solving. Like, how can each of us help you solve a given problem at any time? I think it's important for meetings as well, even when you know each other well, starting with some form of check-in question really helps. At least in my culture, I see these more in US meetings, so maybe you see them more over there and sometimes over in our Asian teams. As an Irish person, we're naturally incredibly cynical, especially of any like management buzzwords. So for me, it's actually quite painful every time I go, let's start with some form of check-in question. But we'll just pick something fun, right? Something like what's your favorite movie? And you go around and you'd be surprised, even among a team that know each other 15 years, they're like, wait, you like that? Really? Like that rom-com? Like, Bridget Jones is your favorite thing of all time, is it? So it's interesting because it breaks the ice. It gives you a little snippet into that person's personality or life, whatever question you picked, and it just warms people up. Then they're in a bit more conversation mode. And we would also always make sure that, like, in any meeting we have, and especially in this format where it's video, there will always be somebody who will dominate a conversation, because video calls, you lose all the facial, like micro expressions and things like that. So any video call, if there's 5 people in it, it's a one-on-one call with 3 people watching. That's how it works. It's tennis, right? It just moves. So it's really important that you occasionally check in and go, okay, let's ask, what you haven't had a chance to say yet, what do you think? And so on, and move around. So little things like that. Those are all small, very tactical things, but they do help. So encourage people.
Make a difference.
Yeah. Use ChatGPT to generate 100 check-in questions for yourself. It'll make your life easier.
Nice. Finally a good use for AI.
Yeah, there you go. Billions of dollars invested, and it can come up with a couple of questions that you could also get from an internet website.
All right. So to you, what is the most essential human quality in a leader?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I was originally thinking something like maybe empathy and humility, right? And just like, working with people, like, especially we're working with people who are paid for what's in their mind, right? At least our career, and more so than anything else. So in the same way, if you were a manager on something that's quite physical, like, I don't know, working in a factory or something like that, where you would take care of the health and safety of your employees, having the health and safety of your employees' minds in like very high up your list is really important, I think. But if I extract that out a bit, I think it's, so I try to probably lead with with empathy and trustworthiness. But I think what's more important, the more I think of it, is a leader should be authentic above all else. So if the leader is not an empathic person, right, or they're a much more directing person and forceful or whatever, that's fine. But like, be that, like, be 100%. You don't gloss over it. Don't
Trying to be something else.
So that, because people will always know if you're being slightly false or putting something on or something like that. Whereas if you are yourself, then people can disagree with your methods, but at least you as a person, they're like, okay, that is how this person operates.
So as you said, your team is generally distributed, remote. When you bring new people in, how do you develop the level of trust you need to make them a part of kind of such a sensitive team?
So that's genuinely one of the trickiest things with a senior remote team. Ideally, you have people meeting face to face, right? Ideally with the entire team, hanging out at a team meeting for a couple of days, where you also have some social activities so people get to break down the work side and just get to know each other as humans. And the more of them you can do in a shorter period of time, brilliant. So like, if you could do one every 3 months, a team meeting, you'll get a person integrated quite quickly. In reality, that's not always like financially feasible, right? Or just travel and logistics and all that kind of stuff. So if you can't do that, the next best thing is bringing them to some of your other team members, right? So like, have them have a buddy or two that is in their region where they maybe can go for a week, hang out and start working. So all that physical side is really, really key. If it's at all possible, you can do a certain amount remote. I mean, we actually onboarded a few people into the team even during COVID when that was happening. So obviously, going around to like, hey, let's all get together and cough on each other wasn't really an option. So it was definitely tougher, being honest. Like, those people did find it harder to integrate. And we tried all sorts of like, social activities and within the team, having coffee calls with each other, like all the games and stuff that people did during COVID. Yeah. And it helps, but it just warms you up. I wouldn't say you get to any sort of real, true level of trust. They are, in those situations, they are your colleagues that you work with, but it doesn't get much further beyond that. So I haven't seen a really good solution outside of them having a chance to meet physically several times to strengthen those bonds.
So what would you say your favorite activity is for building that trust and building that connection? Because I know your team has done a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, we ran out of good options at this point. We haven't done after about 15 years. So it's never necessarily one individual event. It's not like you go to your classic team building and it's like, let's all go karting or bowling or something. What I think is there's a couple of core aspects to them. One should be, wherever you are, make it something unique to where you are. So like, good example, don't go bowling. You can do that anywhere, right? If you're in Ireland, do something unique to Ireland. If you're in Germany, do something unique to Germany, right? Because that adds a moment in time to the event where it's like, this could only have been done at that place, right? Ideally. Then have something that forces the team, well, not even forces it, but just naturally lets them be in conversation quite often during the day. But I think the most important part is something that has the team laughing together. Simple, right? But when people laugh, it just psychologically does a whole bunch of things in your head. Whether you realize it or not, you're going to start forming connections to those people. Your brain's like, I just got a dopamine hit. Where did I get it from? Those people. I want to meet those people again because they give me dopamine, right? So if you do that, it helps. So, and how do you engineer something where you're laughing? I'm not saying we all go to a comedy club or something. Just, it can be sometimes just the conversations on the bus on the way to somewhere where people are messing and stuff like that. So just engineer those situations where there's more like a team are smiling and laughing together. Those are the ones that will be lasting. And if you can anchor that to a unique event or something, it just helps lodge it in the memory for people.
Definitely still have some of those pretty firmly wedged in memory. So,
yep. Just, we mentioned Martin earlier. I don't know if he listened back to this, but Martin was a master of picking those locations and figuring those things out. So,
absolutely.
Well done.
Well, let's pull a DeLorean out of storage, go back 20 years, track yourself down. What's your advice to you?
My advice to me 20 years ago, I don't know, sell a couple of kidneys, put half them in Bitcoin, the other half in Apple, right? No, but aside from that, honestly, I think it's maybe at a younger age, even embrace that kind of research mindset for how humans think, the psychological side of just how the human brain works, because it's a fascinating subject that it will help you even in the IT security career, as like that's how attackers work and the social engineering works and all that kind of stuff. But it would also help give you a lot of the building blocks for what will maybe later play into leadership. Regardless of whether you would ever be a line manager or have teams under you, you will understand everyone around you and how to collaborate better and so on. And I think that's probably when 20 years ago, when you're younger in your career, you're probably more obsessed with certificates and technical skills and how can I be the best hacker, reverse engineer, or incident responder, or whatever is going on. So that human angle tends to come later. I'd say if you had a head start, it would really, really help. So that's what I would advise. That and I'd keep the DeLorean because they're awesome. And they're made in Ireland, by the way, up in Northern Ireland, or the Ware. They're not, you can't get them anymore. You'd have to actually go back in time with a DeLorean to buy the DeLorean.
To buy a DeLorean. Yeah, abandoned in an old mine shaft or something. And
of course. Yeah, just use a train to speed it up. It's fine.
There you go. It'll be fine.
Great.
All right. So how do you approach mentoring the next generation?
So that's actually something I love. It's probably one of the main motivators I have in a job. So we have a concept in Trend Micro. It might actually be a public concept. I'm not sure. But it's called the Hedgehog Principle. So I'm guessing it probably isn't public.
I don't know that one. That doesn't mean it isn't.
Imagine a Venn diagram where you have a three-part Venn diagram, right? One part is what are you passionate about, like what you absolutely love doing. And then the next part is like what are you good at, like you have the skills, technical skills to back up. And the final part is what brings value to whatever business or organization you're in. And if you look in the middle of all that is the like, I don't know why it's called a hedgehog zone. I should look that up. But there was probably a story why it is. But either way, if you aim for that point in the middle, kind of expanded version of this might be the Japanese kagi kind of concept as well. So figuring out for the members of the team what that area is, they love, they're good at, and that would be valuable. Then if they are more junior in their career, maybe think like, what would I do if I was them? And be a bit more giving mentoring and advice of like, I would recommend you do this next and you do that next. And if they're more senior in their career, then it's more about coaching, asking them the questions so that, because they already have the answers in their head at that point. And it's just asking them the right kind of Socratic questions to drill down and let them realize it for themselves, right? And in both cases, it's incredibly rewarding when you see somebody grow to the potential. And as you said, sometimes maybe leave the team, leave the company, but go off in the right direction. It's probably one of the most rewarding things, I think, that you can do as a manager.
So how about outside of your team? Do you have any opportunity to support people out in the community?
Yeah. So I've had a chance both for like other teams within Trend Micro, gotten a chance to mentor some people, occasionally mentored them into my team. So that's kind of poaching, but like, it works. But then outside of the company itself, so for about 12 years now, it's a DEFCON group for anyone who knows that concept. But essentially we come together once a month. We have 2 talks in security and then just hang out and have some beers and things like that as well. So there's any number of people come through that kind of thing. We have a lot of graduates because there's 2 good universities here in Cork. And so they would come in and of course they're always asking, how do I get into security? And then maybe once their first job is like, what should I do next? And so on. So I get on a monthly basis probably a chance to sit down with some people and just give them some tips and things like that. And it's nice then when you see them later, they're like, oh, I've now got this job and now I'm on to my second job and so on. So it's quite rewarding.
Are you still teaching?
I stopped teaching. So I was teaching for about 15 years as a side job, or lecturing to be precise, in malware analysis in 2 universities. And the reason I ended up stopping was in the middle of the pandemic. And when I started teaching those originally, I remember one of the malware modules had about 30 people on the malware course, which was fine. That was good. And by the time I stopped, there was 120 people in that module and about 100 in the other one, which is all fine because it's all online and I had it recorded and I was pretty proud of the notes and things, until you come to like an assignment correction weekend. And when you have 200 plus assignments to go through, honestly, of which maybe 30, 40 are excellent, really good, and you feel proud of people, a good 50 are pure drivel. And you're like, really, this is like, I still have to look for marks in this for you, but it's meaningless, you start losing the will to live. So yeah, for me, it was a case of I had other priorities and things I wanted to do. And I thought, 15 years of teaching people, I'd given something into the community from that. So I enjoyed it, but there's other areas I could put my energy.
Fair enough. And so we've talked a bunch about kind of how we've aged along the way, how things have changed. What would you say the hardest step moving up the ladder has been for you?
So for me, I think the hardest thing learning, because it didn't come as naturally to me, and I think everybody's going to have something, right, that they have to learn kind of that way. So for me, it's delegation, which is something that naturally doesn't really fit my personality type. I tended to be a person who would always jump in and help out and take the load off others if I could. And obviously that doesn't scale once you've got more and more people and teams, and you end up just taking on more stress on your own shoulders, and then you actually end up being a poor manager or leader because you're stressed the whole time. So it was something where I actually had to go and genuinely read up on, research what works, what doesn't work, what would work for me as a person, and so on. So I've gotten better, at least I think I have. So that is probably the one that took me the longest. It took me longer than it should have, really, to get a good grasp on and to put it into practice.
Good. Any advice for people wanting to get into the field?
Into our fields. And so depending where you're at, if you're starting right at college type level, I think this is the security industry. The hardest job you will probably ever get is your first one. And then there's a certain degree of getting to know people and being able to pivot up to other ones and so on. So for the first one, advice I would always give is to, of course, if there's some certificates and things, you have the options to go do them if they're relevant for you, especially the ones with all the names that we tend to recognize, the SANs and the CISSPs and all that kind of stuff. But as importantly, and what I'd look for from hiring somebody, is seeing that they have a passion outside of the 9 to 5 of whatever it is that they're doing. So as simple as do some research yourself, or do some home hobby stuff yourself, like where you spun up, your own home network and you did things, and then document it all. So write it up, post it on, a LinkedIn, a blog, Medium, Substack, whatever you have, right? Just something where there's something to show, oh, this person's genuinely interested in this. And you don't need to necessarily go out and promote yourself on social media at that level, but at least when you are later on applying for a role, or even reaching out to a company that's in your area that doesn't have roles advertised, you can go, this is who I am. This is formally what I have. Here's some certificates and things, but here's who I actually am. I'm this person who tinkers with all this stuff and reverse engineers the weekend and does red teaming over here in CTFs. That probably as valuable. It mightn't, I think you need a balance between the two. You need the certs type stuff, honestly, to get past the HR person in a lot of companies. And then once you're on the desk of the hiring manager, they're probably going to be more interested in this person's interested in all this stuff. But if you don't have both, you might never get past the HR person. These days, the AI automated system.
The AI standing in for HR. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So one of the things I heard there, and I think I know you well enough to know what you meant there, but how does work-life balance fit into that hobby project and, doing stuff outside of work hours?
So I think the catch is I'm very lucky to have that my work is very heavily overlapped with my hobby, with the exception of, in case anybody's watching this in video form afterwards, you might notice I have a thing for Star Wars, right? But apart from that, generally speaking, yeah, it's very much an overlap. That has its own challenges in that, in theory, work never ends, right? Because you finish, you have your dinner, whatever time of the day you have your dinner, and then you might go back in the afternoon, and sometimes you're tipping away at actual work, checking emails, following up things. Other times you're doing something in security or research that is very work adjacent, right? And it can feel at times like it never ends, right? Because you never turn off from it. So I think that's kind of healthy as well, a certain parts of your career, if that's what you're interested in on both sides. But find a thing outside of that, the thing that has nothing to do with work. It could be your family. It could be, you said, Star Wars I'm into, writing and reading up and things, or going out in nature. Have that, block those times in for yourself at certain times. Could be certain times of the day where you hang out with family. The weekend, I have to get out of the house, I'm going to do that thing. If you don't do that, you will regularly run into just being exhausted and even to the extreme cases to burnout. So it's something really important that anyone in our industry has to realize. your main muscle that you're using every day is your mind. So you have to take care of it. The same way as if you're an athlete, of course you take care of your muscles. You go on ice baths. You do all the things to make sure that they function to the best level they can, despite the hell you've put them through that day. So we have to do the same for our brains and just psyche in this industry.
Good. All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Before we wrap it up, if people want to follow along with your work, where's the best place to look?
The best place to look is trendmicro.com and go to the research section. Anything that comes out of the teams I work on will end up there. If it's not from my team, they're still from some other excellent teams that we have internally that I personally enjoy reading over. So I would highly recommend to go there.
As always, Bob, great chatting with you.
Always a pleasure.